Hello, this is Professor Kent Lee, and welcome to another round of English conversation. I am still settling into my office, my new home here, and still learning the LMS, and also adapting to what will probably be a largely or almost entirely online semester. So I'm still in the process of making changes to my course contents and materials and trying to catch up on my work. So I hope to make some decisions soon about how I'm going to conduct the course, online especially, how I'm going to do assignments, whether I want to do it all through the LMS directly or through Google Forms as I've been doing. I will continue to use my YouTube channel and my website as a backup. Of course, you can should view the videos mainly in the LMS, and the handouts should be there. I've had trouble making the handouts available through the website, so I will mainly make them available through the LMS. And I'm still working on adapting my book to this semester, this being pretty much an online semester now, largely online. I'm going to have to make some changes to the book. In the past, I use my own book that I've kind of put together. In the past, I would have students go to a print shop near campus and buy it. Of course, you're not coming to campus, so I'm probably going to make it available to you for free as a PDF for the semester. So I will have to make decisions soon about how I'm going to do course assignments, how I'm going to do the lessons or lectures, and I also need to still trying to catch up on grading your past work, your past assignments in the course. And I will also have to make decisions soon about how I'm going to conduct major assignments such as the midterm. So I'm still working on that. You might have seen a syllabus on the website that is kind of a temporary provisional syllabus, and it will give you a rough idea of where I'm going with the course and the course contents, but I will need to change it and make a formal syllabus soon. So we are continuing today with what is really pop psychology. We talked about MBTI last time, and that's become kind of a pop psychology thing, and we'll wrap that up and talk about some other things that are kind of popular in the general public from the world of psychology, what we call pop psychology. I'm going to ask you later to think about what you think that term means, pop psychology. All right, so let's wrap up our discussion of MBTI. MBTI can be helpful for personal use. It can be helpful for learning about yourself, or maybe your partner, your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, something like that, and maybe your differences in a relationship and why you're different, why you think differently, possible causes of differences and misunderstandings in a relationship, but especially just understanding yourself. It's never appropriate to use MBTI to match people, like in a dating service, because relationships are just way too complicated to be captured by simple dimensions like introvert, extrovert, sensing, intuitive, or INTP or something like that. It is definitely not appropriate to use MBTI in a company for placing people in a job or in a position. People of different personality types can do well in the same kind of job or company or career, and using MBTI for that is just way too simplistic. It's not appropriate to use MBTI for job placement or career placement purposes or predicting what kind of career would be good for you. It's just wrong. MBTI is not a scientific test. There are a few psychologists who might think it's a good test and might use it, but most psychologists, especially research and academic psychologists who do actual research on human personality, do not think it's a scientific test. There are other scientific tests that psychologists would use, but they're things that you've not heard of, and they're not going to be in the kind of the popular world or popular internet, because they're just used by professional or research psychologists for research purposes or for diagnosing patients who have personality problems or mental health problems. It's not a scientific test for one reason. You know, if you take it several times, you can get different results. And that's one indication that it's not a scientific test. If it's scientific, it should give you the same result every time, because your personality is not going to change drastically, greatly within a year or 5 years probably. If you get different results, that's not a good sign. Another problem is that it kind of forces you to choose either or we call it dichotomy, black and white. You're either an introvert or an extrovert, but maybe you're in between. And that's one reason you might get different results. If you're kind of in the middle on that scale, and you take it one time, and you take it again later, whether you come out as introvert or extrovert might depend on your mood at the time, how you're feeling this time, and then the later time, and things like that. And a scientific test shouldn't be, affected by, those kinds of things. Another problem is that these categories, introvert, extrovert, sensing, intuitive, if you think about it from a scientific point of view or a psychological point of view, they're not very scientifically defined. What is a sensing and intuitive person? Maybe introvert, extrovert, that's easier to define, but these other categories, like sensing, intuitive, judging, perceiving, thinking, feeling, they're kind of vague categories, vague. They're not very precise. They're not very accurate. And so the way that the test is set up is not really very scientific. So it's really problematic. It has problems. It's useful for personal purposes, but it's not a scientific test. It's become kind of a pop psychology thing in the past few decades, as now there's so many websites and posts on Facebook and SNS about your personality type, your Mbti personality type, and this is the career for you if you're this type, if you're ESFJ or INTF, something like that. There's been an explosion of stuff like this on the internet. Popular sources, websites, SNS postings about this kind of stuff. And it's all not scientific. So you have to be careful with this stuff. It is not really a valid test, psychologically, scientifically. It's pop psychology. So again, what do we mean by pop psychology? Well, we'll be getting to that after we talk about some other kinds of things that have also been in kind of the public domain of discussion, things that come from psychology. Another one you've probably been subjected to is IQ tests. IQ tests are based on kind of a traditional theory of intelligence called general intelligence, or what we might call the psychometric approach to intelligence. So psychometric is kind of an area of psychology that involves measuring people's mental or cognitive abilities. So measuring metric, psychological cognitive abilities such as intelligence, personality, language skills. Psychometrics is kind of the area in the world of testing and psychology. So the traditional psychometric approach believes that there's this general kind of intelligence and it can be measured by looking at a couple of things. Have you taken an IQ test? Very likely you have some kind. There are two major IQ tests out there. They're kind of similar. What did they measure? What did they test you on? And do you think that those things that they measured, that they tested you on, capture all of human intelligence, or is there more? In other words, does it seem like a valid or good or even scientific test of intelligence? What is intelligence? How would you define intelligence? Do you have any idea? Your IQ test, intelligence quotient tests, how did you feel about your results? Were they good results? Were they accurate? How did they make you feel? Do you believe in IQ tests? Do you think psychologists believe in IQ tests? I want you to pause the video and discuss this question for a few minutes. Okay, we're back. Well, a lot of people don't like their IQ test results, usually because they were expecting something better. They're maybe disappointed. Don't worry. Does it capture all of intelligence? Well, that's actually a hot topic for debate in psychology. I think a lot of psychologists don't necessarily accept IQ tests as a valid test of intelligence. Do you think psychologists agree on one definition of intelligence? Is there a good scientific definition of intelligence? One that psychologists and others agree on? There isn't. Nobody has a good scientific definition of intelligence that we can all agree on, and thus there's no one definition of intelligence that we can test. The traditional view of intelligence, or general intelligence, or G it's called, kind of assumes that there's one kind of intelligence and can be measured by looking at maybe a few basic skills. Your verbal or linguistic skills and your mathematical and logical thinking skills, and maybe also working memory skills. So some tests have a working memory portion where, like, I say some numbers and you have to repeat them back to me in order. Working memory, that's kind of maybe one factor in this general intelligence. But there are a lot of psychologists who disagree with that approach. It's controversial in psychology because there is a need to measure intelligence for some purposes, sometimes for education administrators, maybe the military. In fact, the development of the IQ test partly goes back to the US Army, I think in the 1920s and 1930s, and they wanted a way to classify the more intelligent soldiers for certain purposes. So there's kind of a need or demand for it, and psychometricians are happy to fill that. If you become a psychometrician, yeah, you can make some good money designing IQ tests or language tests. Well, one of the problems is verbal and logical mathematical skills. Is that all that there is in intelligence? What about other things? What about music? What about art? What about other things? Are those intelligences? You know, people who are really gifted at music, you think, oh, they must be intelligent. And I would think so too. But is that intelligence? Well, where do we draw the line? Where do we say that how do we say that this is intelligence, but this is just a skill or ability? Something else. The ability to perform music well, is that an intelligence? What about a really gifted athlete who really knows where his mind really knows where his body is moving, or her brain really controls her movement really well, and is a gifted athlete because of that? What about other things? Philosophical thinking. What about interpersonal skills? What about intrapersonal skills? Well, this is the basis behind another theory of intelligence that's also controversial. It's the theory of multiple intelligences. A lot of people have reservations about intelligence, traditional IQ tests, and there are famous psychologists and scientists who don't like the traditional view of intelligence, and also maybe a lot of school teachers, like in North America, who think it just focuses too much on like language and math. And what about students who are good at other things like music and art? What about them? Aren't they intelligent? Well, I kind of want to think so if you're a teacher, and kind of be able to recognize them as gifted or talented in a way. A Harvard psychologist named Howard Gardner came out with his theory called multiple intelligences, and he first suggested that about 8 different kinds of intelligences, and I'll put this on the handout for you to look at. And he said that there are about 8 kinds, and later he's added or suggested maybe more. So for example, there's your visual spatial intelligence, your sense of judging space and distance, and also your own movement and where you're moving. Verbal or linguistic intelligence, verbal skills. Mathematical and logical intelligence. Musical intelligence. Your bodily or kinesthetic intelligence, your sense of movement, like for sports or ballet or certain professions where you have to move your body a lot and know where you're going. Even a police officer, if you're chasing a criminal who's running away or something like that. Interpersonal, which is like social skills, relating to other people and understanding other people. Intrapersonal, that is knowing yourself, being able to look inward and reflect on yourself. Self-awareness. Introspection, or looking into yourself. Introspection. There's naturalistic intelligence, and I think that's not very clearly defined. Your awareness, knowledge of nature and natural things, and then things in the natural world. And since then, Gardner has suggested others. For example, he suggested what he called existential intelligence, in other words, philosophical intelligence, philosophical thinking. Moral intelligence, that is thinking intelligently, critically, rationally about moral questions and moral decision-making ability. Do you think that these should be called intelligences also, or are they just skills or abilities? What do you think? And which of these maybe do you think you're good at? Are you good at some of these? Which of these are you maybe stronger at? Which of these are you not so strong in? I want you to pause the video and discuss this for a minute. If these are intelligences, which ones are you good at? And do you think that these are intelligences? Are all of these intelligences? Should these be considered types of intelligence? Pause the video and discuss with each other, talk to somebody, and we'll come back. Usually when students discuss this, I think a lot of them kind of think, well, some of these really don't seem like intelligences. A famous athlete, should that famous athlete be, he or she be considered intelligent in the same way that Einstein or Bach or Mozart or Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous scientists, and other famous intellectual figures, Shakespeare, Goethe and such, are they intelligent? You know, that seems really odd to say they're intelligent in the same way that, you know, Einstein and Shakespeare were intelligent. Kind of go, hold on, aren't those just some of these just abilities or skills? Well, it comes back to the same problem. What is intelligence? How do you define it? Something you can argue about. There's no clear answer. There's no clear scientific answer. Gardner had a lot of success taking his theories to school teachers in North America, and they ate it up. They loved it. This is a great way to value all of my students as smart or gifted or talented somehow, and a great way to vary my lessons, my activities, so I can design lessons that are maybe good for the kinesthetic students and for the mathematical students and such. Although this has sometimes been misused and over-applied or misapplied in education, teaching kids. The traditional view of intelligence has undergone a lot of maybe testing, mathematical, statistical, so statistics, 통계학 statistics, statistical testing, and such. And so people who believe in that will say, oh, there's so much research and testing, it's statistically valid. And some of us would say, okay, yeah, but the idea of defining intelligence in that way is just not right. Come back to that point in a minute. Gardner didn't really try to do any really scientific testing of his ideas at all. He just went to selling it to teachers and to the public. And it's become a pop psychology thing. There are websites where you can go and take, a test to determine which of these 8 or 10 intelligences you're good at. It's a pop psychology thing. There isn't really enough scientific basis for it, or enough scientific testing. And could you develop a real IQ test for 8 or 10 intelligences? A traditional IQ test takes about an hour. How long would you need to test someone to determine which of these 8 or 10 intelligences she's good at? I wouldn't want to take a real test like that. Tests you find on the internet, they're short. Do you like this? Do you like that? They're not scientific. Kind of fun. Kind of maybe tells you more about what kind of learning style you like. We'll come back to learning style a little bit later on. Those are different ideas about intelligence. There's some other ideas about intelligence and ways of defining intelligence in psychology, but they're kind of complicated, and it's not something that you hear about in pop psychology. They're kind of more for researchers, but there are some more ideas or theories about intelligence in psychology which make more sense scientifically, but it's not something that the average person would be able to understand, and you can't really adapt it to pop psychology because it's kind of complicated and technical and sciencey. We're talking about this because this affects you. Have you been judged because of your IQ? Have you judged yourself because of your IQ scores or test scores? Should you? Should your life be determined by an IQ test? Is that fair to you? So this stuff affects you. This affects people. This affects students. And it makes some people feel bad when it shouldn't. Because all of this is really questionable, I think. Let's talk about another way that this psychometric stuff affects you. Toefl tests, Toeic tests. You know what kind of people develop those tests? Now I have friends and colleagues who maybe work with ETS. ETS is the Educational Testing Service which develops these tests. And there's a certain need and value for such tests, but I also have some problems. Do you think that the Toefl or Toeic tests are good tests of your language ability? Does it capture your English ability? They are popular tests, although I think the IELTS test is better, but they're popular, and a lot of people who are in education fields that I know do some work with ETS on this stuff. But and it's probably better now than it was in the past, but I still have some questions about this. So years ago, I saw the old Toefl test back in the days when it was on paper and pencil, before it was on computer. And in that test, the grammar questions were often like one sentence, just one sentence, fill in the blank or multiple choice, which is the best answer for the sentence, the most grammatically correct thing that would make the sentence correct. And sometimes the questions asked, the questions were about certain grammar structures that only make sense in a context. Certain verb tenses or certain sentence structures, use of things like a and the, those only work in context. More context than just one sentence. a whole context. But the test questions had just one sentence and what's the right form? And that made me angry as a linguist, because I'm more of a linguist than a psychologist. Yes, I am. Made me angry. What's wrong? That's not linguistically valid. So who makes these tests? Well, psychometricians. So people who go into psychometrics, they probably get a master's, 석사, or PhD, 박사, in either psychology or linguistics or language education or something like that. What they mostly study, though, is statistics, 통계학. They may do their major in a psychology department and take some psychology courses, but their main focus is intelligence testing, and they get jobs doing intelligence tests. Or they've had some language and linguistics courses in a language education or linguistics department, but most of their training as a psychometrics person is in statistics. So one time I got into an argument with a friend who was doing some work with ETS, and I talked about these Toefl test questions that I thought were wrong, and he says, but it's statistically valid. He says the math works, the statistics work. I said, fine, that may be true, but it's not linguistically valid. The way the questions are designed is not linguistically valid. Now, I'm sure the computerized Toefl is better, but I haven't seen enough of it to really say for sure. So I don't know. So I still have doubts about Toefl and Toeic tests in general. I do think the IELTS is better, although I know it is more expensive. But because you do a real interview that's recorded, I do think it's better for various reasons too. Let's talk about another kind of pop psychology thing, and maybe this one is interesting. Have you heard of emotional intelligence or emotional intelligence quotient, EQ? What is that? This has also become popular. It's into the world of pop psychology. Just because it's pop psychology, is it a bad thing or is it a good thing? What is emotional intelligence? It's kind of your interpersonal skills, your social skills with other people, but also your intrapersonal skills, knowing yourself. Intra meaning within, inside. So specifically, it's about your understanding of other people's feelings and emotions, and ability to maybe, in a helpful, good way, to kind of manage or react to their emotions, their emotional states. And it's also an awareness of your own emotions and managing your own emotions and being able to self-awareness and being able to introspect about yourself and your feelings. Why do you feel that way? Why does that make you angry? Why does that make you so happy? So being able to introspect about your emotions and your emotional states and manage or regulate your emotions. So are you good at emotional intelligence? Are you emotionally intelligent? Is that one of your strengths? Is it something you need to work on? And do you think it's a helpful concept? Is it accurate or scientific? Can we just dismiss it and say, oh, it's just pop psychology, I don't believe it? Or is there something to it? Pause the video and talk to each other about this, or talk to someone about this.